Well, the DA is set to launch its manifesto tomorrow amid uncertain political climate. The party has lost a number of members in recent months who claimed in some instances that the reason for them leaving the party is because of a lack of diversity. Its current leader has also been criticized for his recent comments in the media. However, though, the DA has dismissed these claims and say that the IRS is ready to lead South Africa in the upcoming elections. For more on this, we are now joined by a former DA leader, Tony Leon. Tony, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Good morning, Aldrin. Thank you for having me.
65 years since the formation of the Progressive Party, how would you describe the state of the Democratic Alliance in 2024?
Well, the Progressive Party was not a very successful political project in the sense it had only one MP for 13 years of its existence, but it was a very important weather vane in South Africa of the direction of travel where South Africa eventually landed. So, for example, the 1996 and even the 1993 Constitution was very much in the image and out of a process which the Progressive Party and its successors had advocated in the white political domain when no other political party was advocating that. Even the ANC in exile wasn't in favor of the justiciable Bill of Rights that we have now, which the Progressive Party and its successors were. So I think in terms of achievement of the Constitution, very big winner, the Progressive Party and successors. In terms of electoral success, more modest, but the DA, as the modern political iteration of that philosophy, has been pretty successful, certainly in consolidating opposition support and being, I think, the only opposition party since 1994 which has moved forward and not gone backwards, except for one election, the last one, when there was a slight reversal. So I think if you put those two together, you've got a fairly impressive set of political credentials. Then, of course, where it governs. So the DA is not just about a theoretical project, it's a governing project. And I was very struck this week that the President, Mr. Ramaphosa, said, well, infrastructure is the flywheel which moves the economy. Well, amen to that. And then we had the revelation, just in the same week, that of all the capital expenditure projects by government in South Africa, 60% on the Western Cape, because it implements, it executes, it can carry them through, it has the administration do it. And yet the Western Cape, which the DA governs, is only 10% of the GDP of South Africa. So I think you put those three strands together, you have a very solid case to make, in my view, why the DA actually is a very significant, viable political alternative in the South African political space today.
Yeah, but what we've also seen, the decline that you're alluding to, is that in 2019 as well, we saw the DA declining for the first time. And I was actually saying a bit earlier on, was the first time that the DA couldn't any longer use the phrase, the only political party that has been growing since 1994, because of that decline that was noted in 2019. But then it also continued then in 2021, and the DA losing at a national level, at least, with the local government elections, 5% of the support that it had during the 2016 elections. What do you think went wrong?
Well, I think the party did undergo a reversal in 2019. I think did have some blowback on the local election results. And the critical test, of course, for the party this year in this general election is whether it's consolidated and can move forward. And obviously, the polls are very indicative of a huge amount of flux in South Africa right now, perhaps the most uncertain election outcome since democracy arrived here in 1994. And we've got to see where the chips are going to fall. So I think that there's all to play for, whether the DA moves forward, stands still, or goes backwards. But there's the bigger question of where the country's going and how that's going to play out and who's going to govern after the May election. We assume it being in May, of course.
Yeah. When you look at the polls currently out, there is a possibility, they say, of the Democratic Alliance losing the Western Cape. Do you see that as a possibility at all? Again, if you look at the local government elections results, in 2016 the DA had 63.33% of the vote, and then in 2021 54.19%. So again, even in the Western Cape, the DA's electoral support has been declining.
Well, I think there's been some decline from a very high base. I would be absolutely amazed if the DA lost the Western Cape. I think it is the one province where you can be absolutely certain there'd be an outright majority. And incidentally, the one poll, the only one I've seen, which I think came from Change Starts Now, which suggests the DA was going to lose its majority, has been very significantly countered by an independent sociologist, Mark Orkin, who last night produced a set of numbers which says the problem with that poll is it didn't allocate or make account for the won't says and the don't knows. And he said if you strip those numbers out, the DA will get significantly beyond 50% in the Western Cape. But, you know, as you know, Aldrin, these are polls, and not absolute predictions. So there's still an election campaign ahead. I think most folk in the Western Cape actually recognize that they in a reasonably well-governed province. The administration doesn't steal the money, unlike in other areas, and they do a creditable job, and they spend most of what they allocate on infrastructural projects, which, as I said, is borne out by the actual figures produced by the government this week. So I would be surprised if the DA lost its outright majority here, and I'll also be surprised if the ANC, on the same set of figures, all the figures, manages an outright majority in either Gauteng or KwaZulu-Natal. But, as you know, we've got a few months to go.
Yeah. In the book Future Tense, you argue that one of the biggest challenges for the DA is how to maintain its majority support amongst minorities and increase its meager voter share amongst the black majority. Do you think that the DA has an answer for that particular challenge that you are raising? They're also considering the by-election results that came out this week in George, where the Patriotic Alliance took a vote from the Democratic Alliance.
Well, look, I mean, when I wrote those words, and I absolutely stand by them, of course, since I wrote them, I was reflecting on the very strong hold that identity politics has in South Africa. A lot of people vote not necessarily their economic interests, they don't vote their social conditions, they vote because of the group that they belong to. And that is a factor of our political life. It's not unique to South Africa. It's probably accentuated in South Africa because of the history that we've got in South Africa. So the question is whether you can get beyond that. And I think there is some sign that there's a country that's getting beyond that because, you know, we have seen overwhelmingly that people in South Africa do not just subscribe to race politics. It's part of their identity. It's not the only part of their identity. And otherwise, the other surveys that one can quote would indicate that racism is the greatest problem in South Africa, whereas, in fact, most respondents, black respondents, put a huge number of other issues, education, jobs, healthcare, and so on, ahead of race as an issue. Now, the dilemma for a party like the DA, which tries to be non-racial, is can you translate that into votes? Well, so far, it's a project, as I've indicated, with modest success, but, you know, with the ANC split now into three warring factions. There's the EFF version of the ANC, there's the ANC classic version inside the ANC, and there's the Zuma version. I would think even if the DA doesn't grow hugely among new voters, if they stick to what they've got, they could still be a very significant player after the polls have closed.
Okay. Earlier on, we spoke to former Gauteng Premier Mbazi Mashilowa, and this is on the possibility of a coalition at a national level. And remember that the ANC Veterans League has said that they see the Democratic Alliance as being a much suitable candidate for the ANC to go into a coalition with. Just quickly listen to what he had to say, and then I'd love to hear your opinion.
No, I mean, all political parties, even a party that really have got no hope in Snowball's chance of getting any vote, will always say we campaigning to be the government of the day. Once elections have taken place, if there's an element that needs coalitions, I'm sure parties will be able to talk together. But I really don't think people need to count out the ANC. A wounded buffalo can still charge. So I'm not saying that they will win, but I think that, working on the assumption that because Paul says they will lose, it may not happen.
Well, Tony, the multi-party charter is clear about who they want to go into a coalition with, and that excludes the ANC as well as the EFF. But from your point of view and your perspective, do you think that there's a possibility at all of the DA going into a coalition or some sort of agreement with the ANC, should there be a hung National Assembly?
Well, Aldrin, I'm giving you my personal opinion here. I don't hold any office, and I certainly don't speak on behalf of the DA these days, although most of my adult life that's what I actually did for a living, but I don't now. So let me say this. It obviously depends on what the final percentage outcomes are. I'm sure for the ANC, the most desirable thing is to get 50%. They might not. And second worst option for them is to get in the high 40s and cobble together a coalition with the minor parties that won't disturb the direction of travel for the ANC and their policies. If they do very badly, as certain polls have suggested, then they will need a bigger party partner. And then you do have the fork in the road that the ANC will face. Do they go EFF or do they go in the direction of the DA? And of course for the DA, that would be a huge question as well. Let's leave aside any commitments they've made to this multi-party charter. I'm sure if there's a huge electoral earthquake, some of those commitments become less significant. Speaking for myself, if the outcome is a low ANC percentage but still the biggest party, and the ANC chooses to form a coalition with the EFF, that will be a terrible outcome for South Africa, for its economy, for its future, for its place in the world. That is my belief, and you have 100 examples that the EFF is a paleo-fascist party and will, because of its strength, actually, not in terms of numbers, but it actually has a position, whereas the ANC is the muddle in the middle of our politics. They will determine, even if they're a minority partner, the actual governing direction of this country. Okay. If the other alternative is a DA-ANC government, however difficult that would be, I would be in favor of it if those were the two alternatives. Obviously, my first preference would be the multi-party charter with some additions. But if that doesn't happen, and you've got to make a stark choice, you've got to think about South Africa, not about the party interest. That comes first, in my view. State, country first, party second. Look, from a party political point of view, never mind the damage it might cause the ANC, for the DA, which has spent the 23 years of its existence as an alternative, as a vigorous opponent of the ANC, to suddenly be in a cohabitation with the ANC will be difficult. But I think if you polled most DA votes and you said, well, you've got a very stark choice here, which would you choose? I suspect, I haven't seen the data, they would choose a DA-ANC tie-up.
Interesting there. Are you attending the manifesto launch?
No, I was invited, but I've declined with thanks because, I'm in Cape Town. And look, for many years of my life, when I was 13 years leader of the DA and the DP before that, this is what I did. And now there are other folk who do that, and I'm happy to do other things on my Saturdays and go to manifestos, launches, but I wish them well and success. You wish them well and success. Just a quick final one, Tony. The stance that the Democratic Alliance has taken on geopolitics, especially on the Israel matter, do you think that could be a factor for the party as they head into the polls? Well, I certainly think the ANC is trying to make it a factor here in the Western Cape, particularly by riling up certain communities against other communities, which is not actually a very smart thing to do in terms of the national project. But you've got to say to yourself, are people going to have the issue of Palestine, Gaza, and Israel in the front of their minds when they make their crosses, or is it going to be somewhere in the mix? I suspect it's the latter, not the former, and I'm not sure that this is going to electorally, I'm not talking about what the morality and the geopolitics are, is going to be significant. I mean, for example, we've obviously got a very strong Muslim community in the Western Cape, and I'm not sure how that's going to divide on this issue, if that's going to be the primary one, or there are going to be other factors. But you've also got an evangelical Christian community, which is about 5 times larger in South Africa than the Muslim community. And a lot of the spokesmen of the evangelicals are very pro-Israel in this, as opposed to being pro-Gaza on the other side. So, I think when you start playing with difficult international issues and bring them into the domestic terrain, it can reverberate, and not always to the advantage of those who are making that particular noise.
Thank you so much for your time. Tony Leon, the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, speaking to us ahead of the DA's election manifesto launch that will be taking place this weekend in Tshwane.